Okay, board members, we're going to get started. We've excused a couple for a meeting that they had to hit with the superintendent, but hopefully they're right back in. Appreciate your patience. Today we're a little bit behind on schedule, but I'm sure we'll get caught up. In our study session today, I'm really actually pretty excited about what we're going to be talking about today. Today we have with us EDC Utah, which is the Economic Development Corporation of Utah. We have the CEO, that's Teresa Foxley, and then we have the Director of the Community Relations, which is Scott Harbertson. Did I get it? I'm trying to remember all these names. I know it's Scott, who's quite famous, but I don't know if in this capacity, but he's done a lot for a particular community, and maybe we'll be sharing that a little bit. And we also have from GoEd, Val Hale. Now this is a study session, and we've asked you to give us a presentation today a little bit, and part of this education segment is to learn a little bit about RDAs, CDAs, benefit, how, what, because we have a representative voting on these issues, and it seems like this quite often, and that is coming up. And so, Teresa, do you have are you going to run this?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, we'll kind of...
Okay, and if you can push those, we need to push some buttons here, because this will be, there we go. And then there's another one.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, you're good. You're good.
Okay,
You're red.
great.
Red is good, and so
Well,
we'll get this other one.
well,
on.
thank you again. We appreciated the invitation of the chair to be here at your study commission today. As you mentioned, I'm Teresa Foxley with EDC Utah, joined by my partner in crime, Val Hale, with the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and Scott Herbertson. So I think some of what we were hoping to accomplish today was just to share a little bit about the overall statewide economic development process when we're engaging with specific firms that are considering expansions in the state of Utah, what the state incentives process looks like, how that relates to our process, and then how the local incentives process or redevelopment process can play into the projects that we're working on, and hopefully find ways to collaborate more closely. So thank you again. By quick way of background, EDC Utah is a private nonprofit. We were founded 30 years ago with a mission to attract quality jobs and capital investment in the state. And so functionally, we operate as a research, marketing, and corporate recruitment project management arm in partnership with our private sector, our public sector partners throughout the state. So we are funded through 3 various streams of revenue. The first is our private sector contribution. So the primary development community is a big part of our organization. The municipalities throughout the state, the cities and counties, and then through a contracted partnership with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Val, do you want to do the GoEd overview?
Sure. So the Governor's Office of Economic Development has existed since about 2005. It came in with the Huntsman administration. And our goal, our mission, is to enhance quality of life by increasing Utah's revenue base, including education funds, that general fund, and improving employment opportunities. And I might add, we also try to diversify the economy. So right now, Utah has the most diverse economy in America, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing so well. We promote business in the state. We promote tourism and film. Again, tourism just generated about $1.3 billion in the last year, and of that, over $700 million came to the state. So again, Vicki Varela likes to make the comment she spent most of her career trying to promote and help education in the state, but the most impactful thing she's done for education is head up the Office of Tourism, because so much money from that is coming to the state and to support education. We also have great partners and agencies like EDC Utah, the World Trade Center Utah, and others that help us as we try to reach out and increase our economic development activities here. We manage the state incentive program. Teresa and EDC Utah help us a lot with the local communities. GOED manages the state incentives that the legislature has given us. And then we work a lot with the legislature trying to promote good economic development policy. And that's an ongoing thing every session. We play a little bit of offense and a lot of defense in this offense when it comes to the legislature.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of funneling process that companies will go through when they're considering site expansions. And oftentimes they'll first become familiar with the state because they're either already operating in the state. In fact, about 60% of the projects that we work on in any given year are corporations that already have a presence in the state, or they hear about us through a site selector, through Utah receiving a spot on a national publication or some other, they have a client, a vendor, or some other tie to the state. And then as they start to get into their site selection analysis, they will obviously narrow down to a region, and then ultimately they'll end up in a specific city. And all of the development does occur, of course, at the city level. The site selection process for us is one that really we end up receiving project activity through any number of different sources. So that may be through site selectors, which is a niche group that we market to. We consider them to be influencers in our space, but they advise clients on where to make headcount decisions and capital investment decisions. And again, they would analyze things like the labor force, the regulatory climate, the overall cost of doing business, the supply chain in a given region. And so we actively market to this group of individuals who can essentially take our message, they can amplify our message. We exhibit at trade shows in connection with the governor's office. We do targeted recruiting missions where we try to identify companies or where we work in industries that are high growth, where we have some sort of a value proposition to them, and where we have a sort of strategic competitive advantage as a state. And then through press and promotion, as I mentioned. So we will initiate a project if they can answer 3 of 5 questions, and those questions relate to what is the headcount associated with this project, what is the timeline associated with the project, what is the real estate requirement, do you have budget to do this, and do you have management buy-in? So we go through this initial screening project, and if a company can answer at least 3 of those 5 questions, we'll say, yeah, this is an actual project that we can engage on and that we can put staff resources into. If not, then we just consider it an information exchange, and we'll share information generally about the state of the economy and doing business in Utah. Oftentimes the company will ask us to send out a community RFI. So they'll say, we want X number of square feet with a labor shed of Y, and we need to be within 60 miles of an airport. What exists in your market? And if we don't already know about something, we'll send that out to the community statewide to try and identify assets that exist within the state. Sometimes a company will already have an idea of where they want to be. I mentioned through that funneling process, they may already know that they want to be in the Provo area. And so they would ask us to send specific information just to that community. As we're working through a site, the business development process, a big milestone for us is a site visit. So having a company come into the state, interview other employers, meet with our education partners or our workforce services providers, and meet with the private sector that can help the company operationalize successfully in the state. Occasionally, they will engage with the state in an incentives conversation, and sometimes they'll engage at the local level. But that's what we're really here to discuss today: is that local incentives piece. Sometimes it's at the firm level. Oftentimes it's at the infrastructure development level. And then a project will either be won or lost. And there's probably a third category there, which is that the company did a serious evaluation and decided not to move forward with the project, and we can get into that a little bit more too. What does the state of the pipeline look like today? How many companies are out there actively considering Utah? Since January of 2017, over 273 companies knocked on our door in one way, shape, or form. Today we're managing 119 active projects, And since January 2017, we've announced 44 projects that have said, yes, we are going to expand in the state of Utah, and we've dropped 110. So dropped those projects, meaning they somehow just stopped communicating with us, they didn't move forward with the project, or we lost it, meaning it went into another market. Today, what this looks like in our pipeline, so I mentioned we have 119 active projects. Of those 119, they're broken out roughly like this, where 62 of them are in the office sector. So that would be anything from financial services to IT to really you name it, some sort of catch-all miscellaneous. And 51 would be in the manufacturing space. So it's a rough, the pipeline, to Val's earlier point, the point of this all is diversification. The pipeline itself is very diverse. So the pipeline itself covers all sorts of different industries and different types of potential users. During the last fiscal year, we announced 17 office wins and 16 manufacturing wins. So you can see from that the state is still very much has a skill set in manufacturing. Many of those manufacturing wins, though, were in advanced manufacturing. So the life sciences, aerospace and defense, advanced materials and composites. So some of the very high-end manufacturing that the state has developed a fantastic reputation for. We love to see manufacturing wins because what we measure as an organization and the types of projects that we try to engage in are those that are high wage or where they create a significant multiplier effect in the economy, and through building out supply chains, manufacturing projects often do that. So let's get to the issue at hand today, which is local incentives. Thought that it would be helpful. One, I've got a true local incentives expert here, which is Scott Herbertson, who was previously the mayor of Farmington and put together a really fantastic local redevelopment project there. And so he can speak to the impact directly on a community, but wanted to talk a little bit just about the mechanisms and the purpose behind local incentives. So the state authorizes local incentives to be provided in the case of to spur development, to create jobs, and to redevelop. And there's really now two mechanisms to do that. Every single year it seems like there's some change to the Local Development Authority Act, which is at 17C. But now we generally think of them as being in two tracks. So the community reinvestment area, which is where a developer would work with each one of the local taxing entities, which really there's three primary in any given deal. It's going to be the city, the county, and the local school district, and then oftentimes there will be some sort of a special services district as well. And each of the agreements would be negotiated on a one-off basis with each one of the taxing entities. The redevelopment track still exists in this in-state statute under 17C, and that is where a taxing entity would be formed. And the taxing entity, the redevelopment track is an interesting one because it allows for the lead agency, which is typically the city, to declare, to do a blight survey and to find eminent, and upon a finding of blight, use eminent domain in order to accomplish their redevelopment purposes. So the redevelopment track is both in historic instances and today, if a new redevelopment was created, is where the state school board comes into play because you have a voting spot on the tax entity committee. So looks like my screen just popped down, but again, my screen's not there, so we can just chat about it. But the community reinvestment areas, oftentimes we have, frankly, very little involvement in the local incentive process. And I say that because a lot of the community reinvestment areas and a lot of the redevelopment areas occur long before a potential tenant or user at the firm level would ever be interested. And so that's where I'd kick it over to Scott to explain a little bit about the process that they went through at Farmington, and then I'll share on the back end of that how the state would get engaged, which is once the development is actually in the ground turning dirt and the increment is being plowed into the infrastructure that goes to support the redevelopment. So.
Thank you, Teresa. Nice to be with you today. As Teresa mentioned, I was a former mayor of Farmington City. Has anybody been to Farmington? You've been to Station Park in Farmington. Lagoon, I'm sure you've probably been there. Anyway, I took office in 2005, but prior to that, in 2003, an RDA was formed for the Station Park area. And as I came into office, we were working with the developer at that time, trying to make sure we had a quality project brought into that area. Now, when the RDA was formed, all of the entities, all the taxing entities, were supportive of it. They all voted yay. And so we didn't have any concerns there. But they were skeptical because the RDA was a 20-year payout for $18.5 million. And so there was a lot of, you know, can this really happen and will it happen? And so as I came into office, I could see all of the issues that were before us. And the developer was a great guy, and he was working hard to do his best to make that development be what we wanted it to be. But each time we met, we kept setting the bar higher and higher and higher. We wanted to have something more in that area than just a shopping center or a strip mall or something else. We wanted something that was world class. We wanted something good. So what we did is we worked with him on the plans of what we wanted as a city. And he finally came to us and he said, you know what, I think this is bigger than what I can do. He said, so what we need to do is go out and find a first-class developer that will work on this project for us, and I'll sell the land to him. So that's what happened in about 2006. In 2007, is we found a developer through the ICSC conference down in Las Vegas, which was CenterCal Properties. CenterCal came in, they loved the property, they loved the geography and everything with I-15, Legacy Highway 89, everything converging right there. So they bought the property, and as they sat down with us, as a council, we started putting into our development agreement with them. We said, look, if we're going to give you $18.5 million, we want something back that's very special. We don't want to just, you know, pad the pockets of a developer, so to speak. And they said, well, what do you need, or what do you want? And they were wonderful to work with. We started throwing out ideas, and we started dreaming. Oh, we want an ice skating rink, and we want a fountain, and we want, you know, and we started throwing everything out that we wanted. We don't want these little 2-inch caliper trees. We want 10 or 12-inch caliper trees so that when we open up that development, from day one, it looks like it's been open for 10 years. He kept nodding his head. But we put all these things in the development agreement so that we had, this is what you've got to do to perform to get that money. Well, they agreed to all those things. So they started building the project, and then the recession hit 3 months later, and it all kind of went right down to a dead stop. So we held for about 6 months, and then they came back to us and they said, we've got funding besides a bank that will take care of getting this project going, so we're going to go forward. We were excited, so they started the project off. And as I saw the plans and I saw the development, everything we talked about, they tried to put in there. The little fountain that's there in the gathering area was about a $4 million project that they put in. They put in also all of the big caliper trees around that gathering area. And, you know, as you go out and buy trees, they're pretty expensive. Well, you get up into that size of tree, they were telling me they're $10,000 per tree. And so they were putting those all over the project. And I don't know, I mean, the $18.5 million, they recognized that was a gift to them, but they also recognized that if they could use that to their benefit, that, wow, what a project we can have, and from the opening day, it'll be successful. So we started that project, and as it started to build out, we started thinking, when are you going to pull the trigger on the RDA? When are you going to start the payback? And so they finally decided, close towards the end of my second term in 2012, they decided, let's go ahead and do our first year increment. We're ready to go. So they pulled the trigger on it, starting the 20-year clock. Well, that was 7 years ago, 6 years ago. 7 years from 7 years from that point, 2019, all of that increment will be paid back. So it's probably one of the most successful RDAs in the state of Utah. And I just wanted to give you a couple of statistics about the value of the land and the taxable money that came in from that land. Prior to the RDA being set up, that 65-acre area was generating a land value of $221,000. And it was bringing in for a taxable amount to share amongst the entities of $2,000. Once the project has been built out now and completed, the value of that land is now $290 million, and the taxable share is $2.22 million. So that's just the benefit of having that opportunity to take that land and give it to a good developer. But I think there's a lot to be said about making sure that the community or the taxing entities, hold their feet to the fire and make sure they get a good project as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. It's an awesome story. I love hearing Scott tell it because it really is a fantastic development. And I mentioned that the state wouldn't necessarily have had anything to do with that project right at the outset. So what I mentioned at the outset was that EDC Utah is in the business of research, marketing, and corporate recruitment project management. What I didn't say is product development. So the local organizations are really responsible for going out, working with their development partners, building something that's that's fantastic, that's going to be attractive. And at that point, we would come in and say, hey, we're working with a software IT company, or we're working with an insurance company. They're trying to figure out where to expand, and now there's a great product in the ground that we would bring to Farmington. And so it's interesting that there are instances, though, where we do work very closely with the local school boards and with the local school districts, and those are for project-specific corporate recruitment projects. I think you had one on your agenda just yesterday, so where a corporation will approach the local taxing entities to say, we'd like to make this investment. We have various different options where we can deploy capital and where we can hire people. To get it to pencil, we need to come up with some sort of a partnership. And in those instances, we oftentimes will get involved with the local incentives process. So that's really the heart of what we wanted to share today, is that there are those two tracks. Oftentimes they're led by the local organizations. Once the product is developed, the objective for us is there is a development in the ground that has, because of the philosophy that development pays for itself, then the developer would typically be responsible for cutting a road, bringing in sewer, bringing out the power line, and that's where the increment is what the increment is intended to do, and occasionally to provide firm level inducements for the corporation. So.
We have a few comments or questions, Teresa, so we'll start with Board Member Reby.
Great, and I think Val might like to make a couple of comments before we move to questions.
Okay, that would be fine.
Just very quickly, I think a lot of times when we talk about incentives and people hear incentives, in their mind those incentives go on forever. And that really isn't the case. For instance, in the state, we have, since 2005, we've incentivized about 185 companies to come to the state. And as an example, in the next 5 years, 75 of those companies will become full tax-paying companies. The incentives will, the time period will expire, and once those incentives go away, then we reap the full benefit. We've been getting a significant benefit from the companies that have come here, even by paying them the incentive. The state incentive, we get about a 3-to-1 return on our investment. But now with the economy being good, the average length of an incentive that we give is like 7 years, and some as few as 5 years. And so after that time is up, it's 100% tax paying. And so people seem to forget when we talk about incentives sometimes that these are finite. They don't go on and on and on forever and ever, amen. That's not the way it works. And when you get to that point where they pay the full tax, then you really, really start to see the benefit, which is what Farmington has done, and they actually accelerated the process, which is phenomenal.
Okay. Board Member Reby?
So today we were talking about one of these agreements, and part of the struggle that we have as the state school board is that we kind of look to the local agencies and say, you know, if you guys are okay with it, we're okay with it too. But we are kind of at a crossroads because we want to make sure the incentives meet the increments, or that one is, when you weigh them together, that they're going to have a long-term outcome that benefits our schools. As a school board, we don't want to take away the local control from these people, but we also are a little concerned that we are just signing off on a line and not really maybe asking our businesses to not incentivize, to provide better increments back. Because that's, incentives is to get them their increments as the paying back, right? Okay. So as a school board, is there any way that we should be trying to help get better increments? Or, I mean, as a school board, what are we, as a state school board, what would our role be in this? How could we facilitate the role? Because for me, I want to see as much money as I can get back into the schools, and I want to have the increments be increased. So that's kind of, when I hear these, I'm like, I recognize my role is not to be an impediment, but I also want to be an advocate for getting more money in our investments. So that's kind of my question. And then secondly, do we have a record of people leaving their projects after the incentives end? And, you know, once they've fulfilled their obligation, do they just take off, or is it a long-term business that stays with Utah after they have finished their 7-year, 10-year plan? Those are my two questions.
Two excellent questions. I'm happy to take the first shot at responding to both, or take the first opportunity to respond to both of those. So first, with respect to how do we make sure that we're entering into an agreement that is where I think we're ultimately achieving the objectives of the school board, which are, one, generate new revenue for the schools, create great employment opportunities for our graduating students, and to help the local school districts achieve whatever additional goals they have on top of that. If I were in your shoes, I would be driving really hard towards making sure that we do have a crystal clear understanding of what those goals are, that the goals are aligned with the state school board objectives, and then ensuring that the local district has policies in place to vet that and to vet that, and then to ensure that there's accountability for that. And so from my standpoint, it's oftentimes a process issue. And I think there are a number of school districts that I've worked with over the years who I know have a crystal clear understanding of how they want to engage in local development or redevelopment projects, and they've got a clear set of criteria, and they have a clear way to measure whether or not those criteria have been met throughout the process. And so in some instances, they want new money coming into their community, and so they are more, they tend to be more favorable to work with companies that have not had a presence in their community. In others, they really want to incentivize the growth, they want to incentivize local companies to expand. And so there are two different ways really of process and policy around that. Some of them want to, there's a little bit of a tension and dichotomy around, some would like to see that new money come into the community and to not have a significant strain on the local infrastructure, especially the school infrastructure. So they would prefer to see maybe a highly automated, a high CapEx type of project, even a data center, where there aren't a lot of employees associated with it, so not a lot of new school children coming into the district. From our standpoint, again, research marketing, we really leave that up to you all to set the policy, the goals, and the objectives, and once we know what they are, we can go out and market to that. So it's, from my standpoint, really a process and a policy decision. So.
And I'll answer the second part. You know, I think that occasionally companies may, when their incentive expires, look elsewhere. I've rarely seen that. More often is that, for instance, like during the downturn, we had some big companies that came that basically, you know, went under or just left because the economy was so bad. The nice thing about the state's incentive program is that it's post-performance. So if they do that, the taxpayers aren't at risk at all. if they don't meet their goals, they don't get an incentive. And so, it may happen that companies say, well, our incentive's up, now let's go look somewhere else and shop elsewhere. I don't see it very often. I don't know, Teresa, if you're familiar with many of them.
There's one example that I would share, which was in West Jordan, the Craft Made facility that was probably went into the ground in 2005-ish, when before the recession, Craft Made built beautiful cabinetry. They had about 1 million square feet. They had a very high power load that was required, a heavy infrastructure project. And they did go through the local incentive process, and they didn't leave because their incentive expired, but they left because the market tanked and people weren't remodeling homes or building new homes really at that time. And so the increment had gone into it, and there was a lot of hand-wringing over what to do with the facility. And that is what I would say the beauty of local incentives. If when they're structured correctly, if they go into infrastructure, it's an asset to the community. So even though Craft Made left, in fact really never fully operationalized there, West Jordan then had an asset that they were able to use, and in partnership with Val's office at the governor's office, then went and said, hey, we actually have this 1 million square foot building that's got a lot of power going to it. It's got rail connectivity, and now Boeing is operating out of that West Jordan plant because the local increment, although it wasn't utilized by Craft Made, ended up being a real asset and a real benefit to another end user. So that's probably something else to think about in your policy, is ensuring that infrastructure, once it's put in, that there's a way for the local community to continue to take advantage of it regardless of whether or not that user is there.
And I might just add to that, Boeing, when the community got Boeing, they not only got Boeing, about 200 companies exist in the state of Utah just to support Boeing. So the increment paid for Boeing to be there, and you got all of that add-on economic benefit in the community that came with Boeing. So you started with Craftsmade, they went away, and you got Boeing and 200 companies as a result.
Okay, Board Member Wright, we have, there's about 3 or 4 board members have questions or comments, so we'll go with Board Member Wright.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. I mean, all 3 of you are very impressive, and I think we completely agree. We want Utah's economy to thrive so people can find jobs, and we want to grow the tax base. I think all 3 of you understand this really well and are really good at what you do. In fact, you're so good, you kind of frighten me and the public education community. And I wrote like 10 points down, we could talk about, but I don't want to waste your time. Here is just really what I want, and what I think scares public education community and some changes. In the past, the quintessential example is what happened with the Geneva-Anderson RDA in 2010. Alpine School District looked at that and said, this is $300 million, it should only be $150 million. It's on our back, it just shifts development around within our area, and we're against it. And the state school board representative surprised them and voted for it. Robbing Alpine School District of $100 million in taxes that shouldn't have been given to a development project. I think in private, all 3 of you would agree that was embarrassing and essentially an abomination. If that stuff can stop and we can, engage in good practices, I think we're all okay. But if that kind of nonsense goes on, you're going to have a battle, because I think we'd all agree that public education is not adequately funded in our state. And I think you'd tell me, well, we're trying to grow the tax base, so it is. But when it's built essentially on the backs, because I would guess most of these RDAs, 65 to 70% is coming from public education. And as you appreciate, when you ran for mayor of Farmington, you were running on development, economic development, real estate, these other things. The poor little lambs who run for school board have no idea all this stuff you're talking about. They have no idea. And in Alpine School District recently, you guys came down with big guns, basically said you have 3 days, you can't disclose the name of the entity, and if you don't approve it, you're basically going to cause the end of the world. That's the kind of pressure they felt down there in Alpine School District. So I'll just tell you, I think there are three things that are real problems, and maybe you can respond to them. You know, the school district needs, when you say, school district has to give 70%, and then the other entities can vote to force them to give 70%, that's wrong. I mean, the school district is the entity. If they're giving 70%, they should be able to negotiate anywhere between 0 to 70% of that amount on their own without the special service district having a vote equal to the school districts. I mean, I just find that horrifying. And thank you, Teresa, for nodding your head.
Well, I would just say, respond to that, in that I think a lot of people saw that as a challenge and an issue, which is why the now really primary and preferred track in many of these cases is that CRA track, which
Okay.
does not allow for the tax entity, which essentially eliminates the tax entity committee, and means that the developer or the project is interfacing with each one of the taxing entities, and that they can negotiate whatever deal they want. And that does not have to be, the local school district could say, hey, this is awesome, we want to participate at the same level, higher than or less than the other entities for different terms. And so I think the issue that you've identified was fairly broadly recognized, and again, that's why that track, unless there's a finding of blight, is going to be the track that most people, that is most utilized from here on.
So that's not going to happen anymore.
Unless you're looking at a legacy EDA,
Okay.
or if for some reason you look at, what they're trying to do in Murray, which is, I think we can all agree, blight and an eyesore driving through there. You look at what happened in Midvale, where we're dealing with a Superfund cleanup. The taxing entity committee and the EDA process still, I believe, has a lot of value in specific instances, but the CRA is going to be what you see most developers choose because of the timelines associated with it, and I think because the entities are going to ask for it.
Yeah,
Like, nobody wants to be strong-armed into giving up increment
yeah.
because the other taxing entities can force them into that.
The next 2 points, and I'll go fast, Mark.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I loved how you talked about, 7 years, we got the payback, you measured it. I think you're really on top of this, and that's great, but most of these school districts just have no idea, and there's no accountability. And I'll just say I'm a strong Republican, but I love what Ben McAdams has done to hold these RDAs accountable. I mean, he is, from what I understand, requiring kind of a reporting where people will know in Salt Lake County, how's this RDA performed? So next time Facebook comes and says you have 3 days to decide, they can pull up the data and say, okay, here's how these things have performed in the past. I mean, so frequently I come to school board members and they give this glossy presentation, all of these things are great. But these school board members don't even know how these things have performed in the past. There's no accountability. We give them a $10,000 grant, and they have to report, how successful it is to death. But they'll give a $100 million property tax break, and they have no idea. There's no accountability on whether it's worked or not. Do you feel like, the projects all now have that level of accountability where people know, including the school boards, whether it's been successful or not?
I think that goes back to the question of Member Ryby around
Raby.
excuse me, on coming up with, again, essentially defining what the goal is and creating policies to do that. The school board could certainly say, we're not going to participate unless these performance metrics have been hit. And that can be negotiated into each one of the agreements, but it's the goal definition that I think is really important, and then again, building policies to support it.
Did you want to get to your third?
Third point real quick is it's just the really short timeline is really hard for public input, like the Facebook one down there in Alpine School District. Maybe that's what Facebook put on you, but I don't like that kind of pressure on our sweet little school board people down there. I mean, they were horrified. They said that publicly. They said it in the Daily Herald article. You put enormous pressure on them in a very short time to make a huge decision, but they couldn't even share the name with the public. I mean, this is not America. This is kind of Mexico-Brazil approach.
Whoa.
All right,
Hey,
tell me what I'm missing.
Let me tell
Tell
you,
me
first
what
of
I'm
all,
missing.
my advice is don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. Alpine School District knew about this and worked with us for quite a while. It wasn't a 3-day process. It was months. It was over several months. There were a lot of things that were said that weren't exactly accurate in that. And so we worked with Alpine School District for quite a while on that before the 3-day period came about. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but it was not that rushed.
Okay, well, that's why it's really good to have these meetings to get this clarity on this process. If I'm just we have a couple of comments or questions, but we didn't cover it here very well because of the interest of time and that, but just for the board's information, EDC Utah Economic Development of the state, a lot of times we get these inquiries, and these companies are that are looking at our state. They don't want you to know who they are, so they come up with these phantom names that are quite unique. The one in finance today was not Salt Lake, but Pepper River, for an example. Because they don't want to be pursued and chased and all that. And after you are involved in these a little bit, you can respect where they're at as they're trying to look at coming in. But they're also looking at other sites. And there's some hot places in the West right now. There's the state of Utah competes against. There's still, people say everyone's leaving California. I work for the city of Victorville, and their economic development is doing very well, better than anticipated. You know, people aren't completely leaving, but a real hot place that we compete against. And I see it because I put infrastructure there, and that's the Reno Sparks area, white hot, and we compete. One of the ways we survived the recession was because of the diversity that we have, and the governor and the office wants to have that diversity. But I want to come back to one comment and I'm not taking offense to it, but I think if my hearing devices were working well, is that some board members are like lambs. Is that where it was? Am I close? As a lamb on a local board member, on a local board about 12, 13, 14 years ago, Great Lakes Cheese down to Fillmore, you know, my little sanctuary where we run our corporate offices, Fillmore was dying. Farms were going down. Enrollment we were slowly, one of the hottest things that was happening besides the school district was our company was still there. We had this tight window to try to get Great Lake Cheese, because they were going to make a decision. They're going to be turning dirt and building a cheese processing place, and we were competing against other states. And for some reason, they liked Fillmore of all places. You know, it's where you get a ticket. They have a really good Maverick now down there. But I like it there. But,
And Larry's.
well, it's not Larry's anymore.
Larry's.
It's not Iceberg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it happened within weeks, and we had to act fast. And I think it was between the governor's office and EDC Utah, we packaged this all up. Our board was very much informed. The city dumped a lot of money into infrastructure and was one of the best things that ever happened, besides Sunrise Engineering in Fillmore. I'm just teasing. The Territorial State House. But not all board members are that naive, but they do need to be informed, and there is this process. So some of board members' rights, I've worked board member rights concerns are legitimate because we've seen some fast track. We have to, and we're pressured into we're kind of pressured into we have to make our vote right now. We have to change our agenda, and if I remember right, are we one of 7? And it seems like we're not that relevant, but we are. Because at one time there was one very controversial vote. They wanted ours to get it over the hump, and it's the way that's set up in statute, if I remember right. And so I hope you're not taking offense to anything that's being said here, but it's real important for our board to know that when these things come before us, that one vote matters, and we're learning too. We learn to ask the right questions as we're as we're getting engaged. And I want to get to some other board members, so I'm going to get off my
Okay.
grandstand here, but.
I'd like to just build on what you said, and I'll be very brief. A lot of these projects, as you mentioned, are very competitive, and they're fast-moving. And so, let's go back to the one we just talked about. Utah was in a very competitive process for Facebook recently, and Facebook did not make a decision of where to relocate until a certain month, and they wanted to break ground. Once they made a decision, wherever they decided to go, they wanted to break ground and start construction literally like 2 months? I can't remember, 1 month later. So it's a little bit difficult. It is a fast-paced thing. That's the way a lot of these projects are. You saw it, you experienced it. One of the things that we agreed with Alpine School District, and I think, we need to do better with all of our school districts, is if it looks like there's a project that is going to materialize, we may not know it is, and it's a bit of a gamble, but maybe we need to pull some school board members in and say, we're working on a project. I can't even tell you who it is, but this is a big project. We don't know if they're coming here or not, but heads up, because, this is on its way. And at least have a little more time to talk about it, because literally sometimes these decisions are made and they are ready to invest and start pouring millions of dollars into the ground almost immediately. And so it's not that we want to drive it, that's just the way business works. And so we're going to try to commit to, and these folks will too, to work a little bit closer and maybe even give these school districts a heads up when we have these really fast-moving projects that are coming their way. And I think it's fair to them and something that we'll try to do better.
Will be fair to us also. Board
And-
Member
and
Cannon.
we always try to
Go ahead.
encourage companies to come in early, disclose who they are. It's really ultimately up to them whether or not they want to make that disclosure. And then on the other side of the coin, these have got to be win-wins. So if that's an issue, that's an issue. But they do move fast. We always operate under the presumption of confidentiality. I have legal liability, actually, if we disclose sensitive information. And
As does the state.
and so, obviously, we actively encourage the projects that we're working with to disclose and disclose early, but oftentimes for various reasons, they choose not to.
Thank you. Board Member Cannon.
I live in Holiday. I'm waiting for horrified faces. We have an RDA project that has been rather controversial concerning the old Cottonwood Mall area. I'd like to ask the Farmington mayor, tell me your name again, sir?
Scott Harbertson.
Scott Harmanson. Spell that.
Harbertson.
Harbertson, thank you. So I've been to Station Park. Station Park is lovely. You have an Apple store there. I mean, that's a rarity in Utah to get one of those.
That's another story, too.
That's another, I'd love to hear that story. But anyway, I think I can pretty well easily say that the citizens of Holiday would love a Station Park type retail outlet put where Cottonwood Mall was. Instead, we are asked to take gigantic towers that will block out the sun, full of high-density housing, that probably will bring a lot of kids into our schools that will never have any funding until 20 years down the road. So I want to ask you about the figure you told us here. You said after redevelopment, you're getting 2.22 million coming in taxes. So are those taxes, where are they going? Is anybody getting back property taxes that you had to forego, Davis District had to forego? Because, of course, you're not bringing in more school children, but they
No.
deserve part of the property tax.
Now, the property taxes that I mentioned, that $2.2 million, that is what the value is, and that's the money that will be generated as soon as the increment is paid, which will be the start of next year. So that will be distributed out percentage-wise to the county, to the city, to all the taxing entities.
But, so,
what before?
As opposed to $2,000 before,
as opposed to $2,000.
for the same
before.
area.
But they're still not doing it. And it's a little different than Holiday because we'd be taking on tons more students that we would be educating and taking care of. Because you don't have high-density housing in Station Park, do you?
We actually put it in the ordinance for that area, that they could, and actually to get part of the increment, they had to put in housing in that development. And if you notice to the to the southeast of that development, there's some apartment complex there. So, but it's not, it's a small area, probably 3 acres is all, but they had to do that to get that portion of it. But that was all the density we put in there. Around the area now, around the Station Park area, there's apartments being built, so there are other high densities being built in that area now as well.
Well, I think the one thing that's happened out in my area is people have become very aware of the plans that, the redevelopment plans that they're putting forward and how that will benefit developers and will be not beneficial for school children for a number of years, so.
I've talked to your community about that project.
Oh, you have?
Yes.
Oh.
And, you know, and some of your council members, and in discussion, because they wanted to know, how can we get a station park? And I told them the steps that we went through and how we did it. But one of the issues that they kept coming back to me with is our traffic counts, you know, and our road system is not going to be able to handle that. And I worry about high density when you talk about that. How is the infrastructure going to be able to handle it?
Oh,
And I told
people-
them that is what you have to be concerned about. Don't be building a project that's going to, you know, crimp your infrastructure.
Believe me,
So-
people are hyper aware of that.
I can understand
So,
that.
yeah. But anyway, love Station Park. Congratulations on
Thank
what you
you.
did.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank
Then
you.
we have another board member after that.
Speaking of high-density, Harriman's, we're talking about putting a moratorium on development there. We're kind of done. So I don't like to compartmentalize. I find it very limiting on decision-making and future goal-making. And I'm glad you're here. So in your crystal ball, when I hear economic downturn, when I hear about economic cracks in the foundation that we could be going into another recession, do you see that as well? And would you partner with the USBE to inform us? So that way we're not providing business cases to the governor thinking we're going to get this money and then have our expectations fall short because we're hitting a recession that you could have foreseen or we could have seen and been warned about.
Is that even in your will? That's not
Is-
really in
is-
your
but-
wheelhouse.
but-
These
but
guys
you
make it
see
happen.
that-
They don't
You
measure
see that
it.
with real estate, right? You see that with real estate. You see with that with business growth. So but, you know, are you seeing precautions being made now?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that we are in the longest economic expansion in U.S. history,
Right.
and we know that what goes up must come down. And so the question is if, not when. I mean, when, not if.
Right.
It's going to happen. I don't see any indication right now that the economy here is going to slow down, but we all know eventually it will. And whether that's a national event that triggers it or some other thing, I don't know what it'll be, but eventually it's going to go down. But if my stockbroker gives me a tip, I'll call you and let you know.
Well, I'm just saying, is the state preparing for that, from the governor's office specifically? Are we preparing that? Should we be thinking about that here? Because we're spending money, we say, oh, I have this dream, let's put it in our business case, let's pass it, let's give it to the governor, and it gets approved. Okay, so there's been no no's, right?
All I can say is I've heard legislators talking about possibly, with the surplus, spending some of it one time rather than ongoing, just as a precaution. Instead of committing to ongoing revenues with this budget surplus, let's put it one time so that if the economy does turn down, we're not stuck long-term with it. I mean, that's the only thing I've heard.
Okay.
And that's actually what they've been saying last year.
For
They're still
years.
saying this year
Yeah.
and riding the trend out.
Still being cautious.
The best thing that we can do, though, for long-term economic success is what you guys actually are doing in this room, right? Which is that no corporation will ever operate where they can't find really, really highly talented people, and that all stems back to a great education system. So prioritizing those investments is of paramount importance to all of us. And probably should have started my presentation by thanking you all for doing the hard work that you do, so.
Board Member Lear.
And thanks. I'll be really quick. Thanks, Teresa. That was a perfect segue. I just realized that you folks came to us, but you're influential people, and I just have to be, for 30 seconds, a cheerleader for public education, because I think a stable, as you said, public education system is one of your best selling features to the work you do. And I absolutely know that one of the challenges in I've watched these RDAs for a long time, and one of the challenges in education's involvement is education. A school district sees $2,000 that's a bird in the hand, and it's saying, can we even afford to give up $2,000 for the possibility of $2 million? And it seems, because you folks are in that business, that seems like, of course you can. Come on. Live bravely. But when you're a struggling school district, and Davis is a good example because it's so big and its tax base has not always been as strong as it is now, then it makes it a real challenge to go out on that limb and say, yeah, we'll give up our $2,000. It seems a pittance for some speculative amount. So I would just ask you folks, being the influential, knowledgeable people you are, to kind of take that message of public education, having enough money, not always being the starving child is the strongest selling factor you have. And that then we can help you with some confidence, because we don't feel like the $2,000 we're giving up is our last $2,000. So that's I think the challenge in being the school board members that Joel's talking about.
I would like to agree with what you're saying. My wife retired last month after 29 years of teaching, so I understand all about education and the value and the importance of every penny in education. I come from a public education family. My father was a school teacher, my sister's a school teacher, my wife's a school teacher, my father-in-law was a school teacher, and my mother-in-law was a principal secretary. So we get it, and we understand the importance of every penny that goes. And I will say the governor, as you've often heard, funding education is his top priority, right next to economic development, because he understands the best way to fund education is to have a strong economy.
Okay. Board members, we are running out of time, and we've been, Board Member Lear, we invited these folks here. We were going to bring them to finance, and we decided, hey, this is really best for for a board discussion. And so I want to thank you for being here. Friday afternoon, hopefully you can still get back and get something done, or didn't ruin your commute. Appreciate your input. Hopefully I feel like we've gained from your presentation and your presence, and hopefully you feel the same. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Next, we'll invite Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones up, and we're excited to bring our school trust funds people up.
Good afternoon, Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Scott Jones. Paula, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Paula Plant with the School Children's Trust.
In the agenda item, the title for the study session is a small presentation. Paula's going to deliver the presentation to you. I'm Vanna White. I will flip the slides for her when she says next slide. So, hang on a sec. And we're ready with the first letter.
Okay, so Scott indicated to me that I should let you know a little bit about what we are doing Since House Bill 404 passed, what our section is doing, and so that's what I'll talk to you about. So under the new law, our primary responsibilities are to administer the School Land Trust program, provide training to pretty much everybody who touches the program, conduct compliance reviews of the program, and then the section leader serves on the new Land Trust Protection Advocacy Committee. In addition to that, the board rule has our section act like a district so far as supporting charter schools in their submissions and the review and approval of those plans, as well as the School for the Deaf and Blind plan. And then we prepare the annual distribution that goes out to the schools in the summer. Next. So these are trainings that have been provided over the past year. We always do what we call statewide trainings that anybody who is on a council is invited to participate in. We did about 7 of these last year, and this year decided that we would try to expand our efforts through online training instead of in person, and just to see how it goes. So we finished 2 of those trainings. We also, Mountain View High School is next week. The one that we did last week was a WebEx, and actually all of Washington District participated in that training. These are other trainings that we do that we're invited by organizations or a district asks for help. We have a page on our website that's dedicated to training materials. When people ask for training materials, we put them there. Those statewide trainings that, no, you're good.
Okay. Savannah?
Yeah, those statewide trainings that we're doing. Natalie Gordon, who's here with me, is really the person who has headed up the online trainings, and we have been recording the breakouts that we have been doing so they can be posted online so that a person who can't get to a training has the opportunity to receive that training. We did a WebEx in the summer that was basically focused on data, and that should be where the plans start, is understanding data for your own school. We're also doing short, like 5-minute trainings that can be downloaded at the beginning of a council meeting that are specific to a subject that councils deal with, so that they can receive that training right in their meetings. We're also looking at partly a request from districts that we provide for them kind of the best practices outline that local boards are using to do trainings in their district. You can go to the next one. So far as the transition based on House Bill 404, we have really been working on increasing our training and providing different kinds of opportunities for training. Also, a lot of focus has been placed on the Protection Advocacy Committee. Since we're the group that's been doing this for many years, some direction and support from us, I think, has been requested, and we've tried to provide that. And the committee has only met once. We have a conference call again next week to try and identify a research firm, one of those things called headhunters, to help us look for the person. Recruiting firm. Thank you.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of what that was. Sorry. And then, of course, our intent is that we will continue to act in that beneficiary role until you all are comfortable with whoever that new advocate is. So if you want to go to the next slide. Scott also asked me to just outline for you what it is that we all do in our section. And since we're a small section, we all do everything and try to be in a place where we can back someone up if someone is out for 3 months with a broken shoulder, like happened to us over the winter. But this is kind of where we spend our time and the assignments that each of us try to keep track of. I think I would like to also just point out to you, Scott asked me to let you know how the Trust Advisory Committee is working. And I think I can report that it's working better than it ever has. I think the changes that the State Board made have been excellent. We don't bring anything to you except this presentation that they haven't reviewed already. So you've done 3 rule changes and since they were established, and we were able to bring everybody on board and have everybody in a good place before it came to you. They've also made a couple of recommendations to leadership. They tend to bring issues that they are concerned about to the group where we can have conversations and try to resolve things, talk about best practices, whose responsibility is what, all that kind of thing. So I believe that that's been a very positive move, and we're quite excited about it. The one thing I think that, 2 things I think that maybe are important for the board to know based on our involvement with trust lands, our continuing involvement with trust lands, is that when I go to those meetings, the CITLA meetings and CITFO meetings, and some of you have come with me and have appreciated you making time to be there, the individual who represents both of the university trusts as well as the Miners Hospital, the Normal School Trust, and the School of Mines is continuing to act in that role as a beneficiary representative for those 5, and has indicated that they have no intention of not continuing that advocacy after this new advocacy office is set up. I'm telling you that because I think it's important for you to know that those beneficiaries are feeling like it's still important for them to have a representative of their own. So some involvement from our office based on what you feel comfortable with may be appropriate to continue. The other thing, there was one other thing.
So if I may interject at this point, along that line of the continuing role that the USBE plays, and then by way of that, your staff, the Trust Advisory Committee, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is appointed by the board, right, or established, I guess, is the proper word. So make sure they understand what the makeup of the Trust Advisory Committee is.
Okay, so the Trust Advisory Committee that will send 2 names to the state treasurer to make an appointment. They don't do the appointment directly. There are 2 from CITLA, the CITLA board appointed. One is Tom Bachtel, who has a background in oil and gas. He's an oil and gas attorney. And Steve Osler, who is a real estate expert with has been with Boyer. And then CITFO, the fund office, made one appointment, and his name is Brigham Tomko, and he's actually was an appointment you all made to the CITFO nominating committee. So he sat on that committee for 4 years and appointed the board members who are now on the CITFO board. And then the state treasurer also had an appointment, and that is Mel Brown. And then the superintendent's designee right now on the committee is me. So there are 5.
And I misspoke. I said it's advocacy. That's what I meant. So, yeah, sorry about that. The key takeaway from that, though, is that, as Paula just stated, is she does represent you, who represents the beneficiaries. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, is about 97% of the trust is our beneficiaries, are our students. So staff recommends to you that we continue to share all the information that comes out of the different meetings, CITLA, CITFO, the Trust Advisory Committee, which is how many members are on that one? The bigger one, the Trust Advisory Committee. TAC.
Oh, TAC.
TAC.
Yes. I don't know, there's about 12 or 15.
So whatever is discussed there comes to you as well, because all of this together is important for you to continue to monitor or to have input on, or that from your vantage point as a Utah State Board of Education member. Also, from TAC, they made a recommendation that the board, the Utah State Board of Education, support the position designation of the director of your section, of our section, maintain that. Is that correct? Right? So this ties into the budget proposal where the $60,000 that I alluded to or briefed you on Thursday or yesterday in your meeting, because part of HB 404 mandated that we transfer $211,200, which was basically what paid for the director position that was taken to go over to the advocacy committee or the advocacy group, so to speak, in order to sustain the pay level for a director for your section. We just need another $60,000. So, you know, we've discussed this with the treasurer, the chair, and I believe maybe Vice Chair Cummins was part of these discussions early on. It took place over in the HR conference room. So we're just taking the approach of, you know, if you want us to, when we transfer the $211,200, you know, we still would need $60,000. However, we can work that out with the legislature so we can sustain the title and the position of director, which currently Paula occupies. It's fine with us, and that's the only reason why that's on there, is to continue this discussion based on the advisement or recommendation of the TAC, right? That they feel that the role of our section is critical to continuing the efforts and the training and all of the briefings, or all of the points that Paula made in the earlier slides with training and the responsibilities that are still there. There's still responsibilities by 53G 712 and Rule 277-477. So that's why we're here, to make sure that you're aware that, you know, there were significant changes by way of HB 404, but the role of your section still is a critical function of the oversight of and the proper use of the distribution of the fund once the funding is distributed to the LEAs. Sir.
And if I might add on this a little bit, we experienced HB 404, and it was like, oh, everything's being ripped away from us. And as that was happening, I just want to go back to what TAC, which is them, the others, they're sitting there going, wait a minute, this is a good thing, this is working, what we were doing here. And so that's where this recommendation came to, this whole evolution of everything, that you maintain your director. There's conversations with the treasurer on, hey, we can work all of this out. Not sure what's going to ever happen with another statute, whatever, but good things are still happening on, I guess I'd say, from Paula's end and all of those services. Right now, it appears today that the TAC and everyone's saying, do not touch, keep in place, stay informed, stay engaged, because, as a reminder, 97% of the beneficiaries are in our court. And so this is just kind of the evolution that's taken place, and also part of the update that we haven't changed and authorized anything, but this is for the board's situational awareness. And there's a couple of questions, Scott, so shall we take some of these? Board Member Hanson.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Paula and Natalie and Karen. They do a great job. I've been to their trainings and they're fantastic, so I really appreciate them. I just wanted the board to understand TAC, and I'm so glad that TAC is going well. 3 years ago when we changed it, 2.5 or 3 years ago, we changed it. It used to be like a big information meeting and everybody just come, and there weren't voting members or anything like that. And it was quite controversial when we changed it so that there were voting members and things changed. And so it's good to know that we did something good.
we do a lot of good things, but this was a good thing that actually ended up for the best. And so even though it was controversial at the time, it was the right thing to do. And so thank you for letting us know that.
Board Member Lear.
As I understand, TAC is just about community councils, is that right? It just oversees what community councils does and trains it. What else does, because it has no influence anymore in terms of managing property or lands or making any recommendations that have any meaning.
The Trust Advisory Committee is now an advisory group to you, to the State Board of Education, and they have representation. You made the appointments, the board made the
But what
appointments.
do you advise about?
Anything related to the trust, anything related to school community councils.
Community council I get, but we have no authority anymore related to the trust.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Well, I mean, and the statutes, unless the statute changes, or unless, and I guess there's this interim period,
Right.
maybe, but my concern is, and I maybe got all this started, is I get, you can, have your employees that manage the community council process and all of that, but I just feel like that the new committee, I'm still bitter, I'll probably get over it, but I feel like this committee took away all the authority of the board, but wants the support of the board and the board's offices and the board's employees and the board's institutional knowledge. And I don't think that's right. And I'm happy to have you do community council work. This is one board member speaking, but I'm happy to have the office continue to do training and have community council advising and all of the stuff related to that. But I don't see any role except you're saying that you're one member on this other very powerful committee that really now has responsibility for the trust. And I don't really see a role for the board anymore. And I don't see a role, I don't see why we need to know about SIPFO. I don't see why we don't have any influence anymore.
And my interactions with Sitlins, SITFO, the board members and the staff, I continue to attend all of their subcommittee meetings. I continue to do the best I can to represent your interests. And if I'm not there, right now, there is no representation for 3 million acres and $2.5 billion. So until that transition happens, I think your interest is happening through our office still. I hope there is no date. Right now, we are just in the process of trying to hire an advocate. And then the advocate will have to come up to speed. And quite frankly, when we get to that point, and you all just think that advocate is the best one you have ever had.
We won't have to say over it anyway, even if he's chronic.
Well, I'm hoping that as we are able to train that person, provide background for that person, indicate to them what we've been doing and how it can happen better, that other committee members, that you will get to a point where you feel very comfortable with that person. At that point in time, then maybe things in our office would change. But until that happens, I think we would be remiss to not continue to do what we're doing. Every committee meeting I'm in, people ask for our input.
Deputy Superintendent Jones, and then we'll go to Board Member Cannon.
Well, and I was just going to express, I think, exactly what Paula just said, is by virtue of the fact that she is a member of the Advocacy Committee, she does still represent. She's asking hard questions. For instance, I think the teleconference you're having is related to your question about, how are we coming up with, or how is the selection process determining who best fits in that advocacy role, because it does, whether we feel it's directly or indirectly, affect or could potentially affect the selection of this advocacy director will affect the beneficiaries. And she's doing a great job of attending these meetings. Well, there's only been one so far, two maybe. So we still do have a role, albeit, and I'm not disagreeing, it's been at least, no, well, I wouldn't, I see what your point is, Yeah, I see what you're saying. I
I
do.
just want to live in this reality
Yeah.
and not
No, I-
pretend that the emperor has clothes, because he doesn't.
Okay, yeah.
Can I say
Go ahead,
something?
yeah.
And I guess that might be true. At some point, I think it's important for you to know that the person that was behind running this legislation still continues to represent those beneficiaries. And the legislation said the advocate would represent all of them. So there are others who are still continuing to play the role that we have always played, and no one yet has told them you can't.
Okay.
I understand better when I don't say.
Board Member Cannon?
Well, I think we're tremendously fortunate to have Paula Plant in this position, because I think she has a skill set and she has knowledge that she has earned and brought to the table over many, many years as an advocate for trust lands and for the children of Utah. My question was a little broader in nature. I want to know how the trust is doing in terms of financially. What do we have in terms of total money in the permanent fund? And how much money are we giving out to the kids? And has there been differentiation since that constitutional amendment was passed, allowing us to give out more money than, and not just reserving it all in the permanent fund? I'm concerned about growing the permanent fund, so that's the reason for my question.
So in the fund right now, depending on the day, but there's about 2.3, if you include all of the trusts, it's more like $2.5 billion in the fund right now. The distribution to schools this year was $74 million, which is about $113 a student. They are planning on distributing next year 82.6, which will increase the per pupil, the statewide per pupil distribution to about $124 a student. I think the confusion about not growing the fund and growing the distributions is more complicated than just that. The fact that they are invested in a much more diverse allocation than they were in the past. And I think we have to all agree that for a period of time, we were probably advantaging future beneficiaries over current beneficiaries, and we kind of needed to get that fixed. But I think exciting things are happening. But, there'll eventually be a downturn in the economy, and then those investments will change. But they're very diverse, and they're not built out yet, but it's much more diverse than it was before the constitutional amendment and before the new office.
Well, I remember waiting with bated breath to see if we could get that permanent fund to $1 billion. And then how long did it take it to double?
Because it's a much shorter period of
I
time.
know, because it took us from, like 1985 or something all those years to get it to $1 billion, and then it just doubled in a short amount of time.
And a lot of that's to do with the opportunity that the state has had and working with, and SITLA, the way that they've managed things to take advantage of certain markets and be appealing to certain markets to bring the stakeholders. A lot of people just think the money or the SITLA land just prints money. It doesn't. There's investors out there that will invest a lot of capital, and not all of them to an RDA or a CDA to make it happen. As we talked earlier, to utilize that land, and so a lot of dynamics have changed. And Paula, we are, as leadership and there's board members, we attend SITLA and some SITFO. I hit the one SITFO meeting. How is that? And maybe I can have some board members speak to that. But how is that perceived by those organizations when we're there? Is that?
I think that they're pleased that you're interested in coming. But I know that you are very busy and have very full plates, and frankly, when they see our faces, they see you.
Okay, I went to.
Not because we wear the same colored suit. So, I mean,
Well,
or
try
have
not
the
to
same
coordinate.
haircut. Yeah. I usually wear glasses.
There you go. I know when I went for the board's situational awareness, when I went to the SITFO meeting, I was sitting with Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones and was actually invited to the table, and actually invited to participate as though I was a board member. I was just a non-voting, and I didn't feel I felt very much included, and I felt like we're still watching, we're still advocates of what's happening there, and even though the 404 put us in a different position, and today there's still SITFO and SITLA still willing to listen to us. The board members are willing to listen to us, so I appreciate that. So if you could keep us abreast if we're overstepping our bounds, or if we're might be a little bit too intimidating or whatever, please let us know. We have a couple other quick, maybe if you want to comment to that, then we'll go to Board Member Reby.
I appreciate whenever you can come, but I don't think you need to feel like you need to be there. If I'm giving you more information than you want, if you don't want summaries and minutes of every single thing that's happening, let me know, because I'm sending everything, but if it's too much,
Okay.
I cannot send it.
I don't think anyone's complaining yet.
Okay.
Board Member Reby.
I'd like to say that I appreciate all the trainings you do online. There has been some conversations at a local level and a school level of what's allowed and what's not allowed. So I do appreciate the outreach, and it has nothing to do with this level, but my other hat, it is really appreciated. So thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
And I would like to thank you as well for your continued support to this program, because and I think we've seen this from all sides of this conversation, that influence doesn't always come from those who have a vote. There's a lot of influence that come from those who have an ear or who have a mouth to an ear. And so as we can maintain those relationships, I think we do, even though our official structure has changed, we still have the ability to influence for the benefit of the school children of Utah. And so I appreciate your continued involvement in that.
And I just want to echo the same, all these services up here, there was a lot of, the LEAs were a little bit concerned with 404 and what was going to happen, what's going to happen with USBE, and will the services be there. And appreciation to you and your staff. You carried the water, still giving the great services. There wasn't a bump in the road on that, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I think please, we have one. I think we will recognize you. Come on up. You bet. The mic is on. Name and title and all that good stuff.
Well, Jay Blaine, and I'm going to speak on behalf as a member of the Trust Advisory Committee today. I was appointed to represent educators throughout the state on the committee, and have appreciated that role, and would just like to say that the committee works on more than just community councils. We've addressed several important issues, I believe, on the committee. One we're working on right now is our distributions, and which is a very important issue, I believe, and we take our responsibility seriously. Some of you may not remember the composition of the committee. We have several parent representatives on the committee. They are there every time. They show up. They're providing great parental input into the committee, into the process. We have a superintendent. We have a business administrator. We have a charter school representative. Provides us with great insight about the way they operate there. We have had legislators come to our committee to provide, to seek our input on bills that they might be running on either community council or trust land bills, which is exciting because we're giving them input from the very conception of their bills to what might be happening there. So there's a lot of good things happening with that, with this committee. And just want to say that it's been a great opportunity. And we've been able to give input to the board on board rules from all those various perspectives, from all those various stakeholder groups. And that is, I think it's been a very fruitful process, a very important process, and I think if you spoke to other members of the committee, they'd probably say the same thing. It's a very involved committee, one of the committees I've been on, I think, where nearly every single person shows up almost every single time, monthly to our meetings, and provides valuable input from all those other places. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for some time today to represent. I didn't really tell them I was going to represent them today, but I think they would say, many of them would say the same things about the committee and our processes.
Okay. Thank you. Paula, do you have anything else to add?
No, but thank you.
Okay.
Just thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. All of us appreciate it. It's been a bumpy road, but I think we're smoothing it out.
I thought you were going to say we're on the road to awesome. I don't know where that would come from.
I don't know where that. We're on the road to awesome.
We're on the road. Thank you, Paula.
There you go.
You can leave 15 minutes early.
Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, do you have anything to add?
No, sir. Somebody
Can't
did any
top
more.
that?
Of course, thank you all. Please let us know. You know, if I never believe there's too much information that we can give you, but I understand the volume of information you're getting. So just let us know how to refine or communicate. As Paula said, we'll do whatever you need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This concludes our study session today. Board comments, is there any? I'm not seeing any, so about a motion to adjourn. Second? We have a second. Well, I'm not seeing any, I'm not seeing any discussion. I almost thought I was, but they're going to be challenged somehow. All in favor say aye. Those opposed? Voting is unanimous. Thank you.